Do we have the management plan? I'm Stephanie from WorkSafe Tasmania and I'll be your moderator today. In recognition of the deep history and culture of this island, we acknowledge Tasmanian Aboriginal people, the original and continuing custodians of land, sea and sky. We acknowledge and pay our respects to all Tasmanian Aboriginal people, all of whom have survived invasion and dispossession and continue to maintain their identity, culture and Aboriginal rights. We ask that you take a moment to read the following slide about information received today. Please use the chat window on your screen to type any questions for today's presenter. Those questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. Today's webinar is also being recorded and only presenter webcams will be used during this webinar. It is now my pleasure to introduce your presenter today, Diane Joubert from Business Monitor. Diane has a background in banking and finance. After achieving her MBA, she worked as a management consultant for over 20 years. In 2004, Diane founded Certex International, a certification company. Diane is known for her quality and safety management skills, privacy and collaboration. Diane often leads workshops and webinars, writes articles and speaks at conferences in Australia and abroad. As a consultant, Diane focused on improving processes and managing change for projects in Australia and other countries. She helps small to medium businesses enhance their operations by implementing risk management, compliance and quality control systems. In the last year, Diane created the Business Monitor to assist companies with compliance, and we welcome Diane.
Stephanie, thank you very much for the introduction. And hello, everybody. I'll just start by saying, well, that is who I am, that brief introduction. There's a little bit more information on this slide. But I think you may be asking, how did I get here? And why am I talking to you about psychological safety in the workplace? Before I answer that question, though, I do want to thank you for attending this session. It's time out of your busy day, and I appreciate that. And I hope I can give you something of value and usefulness over the next 40 to 45 minutes. As Stephanie said, any questions into the chat bar and I'll answer them at the end as best I can. Let me put some questions to you. Firstly, two questions. Firstly, do you know if your organisation has experienced any psychosocial incidents that you know of? Because obviously these are often personal and private. Second question, have you observed anyone who has experienced mental health issues yourself in the workplace? And maybe it was someone that you work closely with, or maybe even you. I would expect that many of you would answer yes to one or more of these questions. So the next obvious question is, are you aware of what your organisation's psychosocial health risk management plan looks like? So we're going to talk about that and what it could include and what it could look like. Back to me for a moment. I worked in certification, as Stephanie said, and set up Certex, which is a certification body. But what I found is actually there are some more critical requirements than maintaining certification. If you lose certification in ISO standard, for example, it's a major shame. But it's quite different if you experience something as serious as a legal breach or if someone is injured. That's a different level, and these really are events that we don't want to have happen. So many years ago, maybe about 8 or 9 years ago, I think it was, Julie Mills and I got together to develop an approach where we assess risk levels in a business. And once you know what the risks are, how serious they are, then you can start doing something about them, including nothing if that's your choice. This is called our iMonitor Risk Assessment Program. And I refer to that because that provides the background to a lot of the material that we're talking through today. We have many modules in this program, but for today, it's about psychosocial risks. Over the years, we've done in excess of 4,500 safety assessments, which is a lot. We've looked at a lot of places and seen a lot of things. Not so many in the psychosocial space, as that's really only emerged as a serious issue recently, but as I'm sure you're already aware, the trend is on the up. Today I want to go through 3 situations that came up earlier this year. In each situation, there is nothing we could have done to prevent the issue occurring, but there are certainly things that could have been done that would have gone at least some way to mitigating the problem. And that's the message that I want to leave you with today, that there are some things we can do to better respond to a psychosocial situation. Things that not only alleviate the situation for the person involved, but also better support the people around them. It's important to be proactive in identifying and controlling risks, but just as important to being proactive is, it is just as important to be proactive in responding to them to minimize the consequences for individuals, teams, and to the business. Let's start by reviewing what psychosocial health is, so we all know that we're talking about the same things. I expect much of this is familiar, very familiar for some of you, but was familiar to most. For simplicity, we can group the common psychosocial risks into 3. Workplace stress can be things like high or even low job demands, challenging work hours, including shift work, low job control, bullying and harassment, and poor organisation structures. And if you're interested in what these words really mean, there is more information partially in this presentation, but in some of the references that I've included. The second thing is worker isolation. There is some real problems that can occur around remote work, poor workplace relationships and support. Actually, I do think the 2 are connected. Low recognition and reward. And if we look at some of the poor health outcomes that we can get from these risks, we've got things like anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress syndrome, musculoskeletal disorders, cardiovascular conditions, and maybe people turning to smoking, alcohol, and so on as means of coping. These can be unpleasant and distressing for the people involved, those who might be suffering these feelings. But as they say, no one is an island, and others around us can be impacted as well. Psychosocial issues can also impact the business. They can impact as a result of the loss of staff contribution to work. So maybe people are wholly or partially unable to work. There can be impact on those around them, team members who may have to pick up the workload or just be distressed themselves by observing what's happening to their teammates. And society generally, where mental ill health can impact social interactions. Let's go to our first case study and start with this. These are the 3 of them. They're real events, but the names and the details have been changed for the purpose of this webinar. In this case, a senior manager in a professional services organisation was reviewing reports submitted by a contracted consultant. And they noticed discrepancies in the document. It didn't reflect company policy, it didn't align with the presentation and the format that was expected. Problems. So this did raise performance concerns, but the manager thought twice about undertaking a performance review. They recognised that this was actually an unusual occurrence for this particular consultant. So the manager discussed it with others at management levels and decided they would first have a conversation with the consultant. And what unfolded is a challenging example of where a psychosocial issue can come from totally left field. So the consultant was Billy, not his real name, but Billy had a son who had been working in the Ukraine. In fact, Billy's son had gone over when he was about 19 years old, and he was working as a soldier in the Ukraine, and he'd been there for 2 or 3 years. So the son was in the early 20s. And of course, Billy was most concerned about the well-being of his son. He managed to convince him to come back to the family over Christmas. So the son did, and he was back here for, I think, only 2 or 3 months. But he couldn't settle back into the peacefulness of the situation. He had become attuned with the intensity of the situation he'd been experiencing in the Ukraine, even being shot at. So the son decided to return to the Ukraine. For Billy, that was an appalling and very, very difficult decision by his son that he had to deal with. He felt at the airport that he was saying goodbye to his son, possibly for the last time. He may never see him again. So for Billy, that was an incredibly distressing and anxious time. And he found it very difficult to deal with that. So what Billy did was he left the business suddenly. The impact on the business was profound. There was no one on hand to replace him, and this was a pretty big job that Billy had been working in. There were now significant delays in the delivery, in replacement costs, and corrective actions. You know, when a manager says, well, at least there was a lot of learning out of this, you know, there was very little upside and there was a lot of downside. This was a very challenging situation. Second case, this was Jason. Jason was a construction manager who got home to find ambulances at his front door. What had happened is that he was the sole carer for his son, who was a late teenager, and his son had called him during the day. Now, normally, Jason would answer the phone, but he couldn't on this occasion because he was very busy with work. So he didn't return the call. Instead, he drove home, got home normal time at the end of the day to be met with an ambulance at the front door. His son had tried to commit suicide. This was obviously a shocking thing for Jason, and there was a great deal of concern. Are you able to hear me anymore? I think my earplugs have just run out. Can you still
Yes.
hear me? Oh, great. Okay, I'll keep going then. So for Jason became very distressed, depressed, anxious. His son was in hospital, so there was not much he could do, but there was a great deal of guilt and blame on himself. He felt pretty awful about it. But he continued to work through. He struggled through with work. There was nothing else he could do anyway. But he was unproductive in his work, late, unfocused, kind of understandable. The business advised the customers of the delay, not the reason, of course, but explained that there would be a delay. And there was a lot of communication. So that initial process worked really well. And the business managed to get through it. However, there were latent problems that emerged because this was an out-of-the-box process. And what I like to say is the gremlins got in. And when the gremlins get a chance to get in, they can make a very big mess. Process wasn't followed. Other people couldn't see what needed to be done. And as a result, subsequently, there were further problems, customer complaints and other issues that came up. The third case study is around Belinda. Belinda is an administration officer. She'd been in Australia for about 10 years and was still quite close to her family. When her grandmother died, at first there was the period where she knew that things weren't well. So she found that very distressing and difficult to focus because she was worried about her grandmother and the effect on the rest of her family members. So she struggled through that period. When it became clear that she had died, there was a funeral to attend. Belinda made a sudden decision that she'd return to her home country to attend the funeral. So far, there's no issue, but what actually happened was that through the first couple of weeks and then the remaining couple of weeks, the workload shifted onto the other team members. They were already understaffed. There was no handover. There was a lot of uncertainty about what was going on. And the other staff members were pretty unhappy and quite, they resented what was going on. So what we're seeing in common between these three case studies is that there's an inability to focus, workload on other staff members, unable to deliver to the usual level of performance, but driven by a situation which has been sudden, dramatic, and one that you can't anticipate. So what can be done when these things happen? Let's look at, I think there are three things that we need to look at. The starting point is to always check where you are standing right now and have a look around you. Check the current level of risks and understanding and situation in your business. What risks and hazards have been identified around mental ill health? What's the level of awareness and understanding around this? Are there particular risks that have been identified for the business, like customer aggression, for example? So these risks may have nothing to do with the case studies that we've looked at, but you still need to work out where you're at right now for the business as a whole. The second thing, check your mental health, I call them protocols. What's in place to manage psychosocial health? Let's start with a written statement that commits to responding to mental health issues, otherwise known as a psychosocial health policy. Are mental health first aiders in place? Is there a communication process on mental health? Is there something about how to respond? Do you, in your organisation, know the best way to respond? Is information collected and available that might indicate emerging trends in the organisation? So what's happening with respect to mental health and how it's being controlled and managed in your workplace? Thirdly, and this is the area I really want to emphasise, do the mental health protocols link or connect to an underpinning management system for the operations of the organisation? Now, I'm thinking here about a quality management system or something similar that describes the operational processes of the business. Many of you attending now will be very familiar with a workplace health and safety management system. So it's a bit like that, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking here about the processes around production maybe, or construction, services, whatever it is that the business does. So there I'd call them your operational processes. Why is this important? Think about each of the 3 case studies. In the first one, Billy left suddenly in the middle of a project. Others had to step in and complete his work. How did they know what he was doing, what he was up to? Was there an approved process he followed, or was it all random? If the process was clear and the stage Billy had got up to was clear, then that might have helped. It's the same in the second case. Jason actually did have a process that he was following in this one, but it wasn't followed right through to the end, only in the initial stages. And what followed from that was a classic case of gremlin attack. The third case was a bit different. There was no break-in process, actually. And even though there was no handover, there was enough understanding of the process that Belinda followed that the work continued without too much trouble. Now, I work in a small business of less than 10 employees, and many of you will be in a similar situation. When one person can't contribute in a small team, then the workload shifts to others. And that workload increase can easily be 15%, 30%, 80%. What's going to happen to that poor person if they effectively have to do 2 jobs? They are now going to experience work overload, work stress, possibly anxiety and depression. So now we have 2 people suffering mental health problems, not just one. One of the great benefits of having a clear and effective management system is that it sets out what needs to be done, when and how. And referring to this information can make it so much easier to pick up the work of another person, or maybe to share parcels of work around everybody else. And once we have this workplace system in place, we can make it work even better, because then we could build into it certain processes to follow if a mental health situation arises. And this actually happened in the case of Jason. Customers were contacted to advise them of likely delays. Perhaps in the case of Billy, there could have been a nominated backup person who was trained, informed, capable of jumping in when needed. It's a big ask, really, for all projects, but maybe. So you could describe this approach as saying that we really need to focus on the back end as well as the front end of mental health management. So what are we going to do about it? I have some questions here that you might like to think about in the context of your own organisation. So when we're talking about checking risk and understanding, these are the sorts of things that I mean. Have any psychosocial incidents occurred? And have they been reviewed for learnings? Have you picked up some more knowledge out of studying these? Is the organisation aware of and supportive of mental health issues? Have psychosocial hazards or risks been identified and evaluated? And have responses been developed? There are lots of risks, many hazards, psychosocial hazards, that have been listed in things like the Safe Work Codes and the ISO 45003 guidelines. And there are lots of other sources as well. So there's lots of available lists that you can get of different types of psychosocial risks. They can help you identify what risks might be relevant in your place, your workplace, and you should evaluate the likelihood. Have any processes or activities been identified as being inherently risky with potential mental health implications? Call centres are classic because they may well deal, probably every day, deal with some level of customer aggression. Unfortunately, there are now many situations that many people in many other workplaces also experience customer aggression. Think retail stores or hospitals. Are these risks periodically reviewed and updated? Because risks change with time and in response to factors if there's new technology or something. And all risks must be updated, maybe once every year, something like that, or more frequently. Next set of questions to think about. Do you have a documented psychosocial health policy? And very importantly, has it been communicated and is it understood by everybody? Is it available if somebody wants to check it? Are mental health first aiders in place? Well, this is very important for large organisations, and high-risk operations such as call centres might not be essential for all businesses. And there are other sources of support as well. Many businesses offer employee assistance programs, and some provide mental health first aid training to members and other staff, so they're better prepared to recognise and support people when needed. Have actions been taken to reduce the likelihood and the impact of adverse social factors? Have action plans been established around these? We're going to have a look at some of those a little bit later. Is information collected that might indicate emerging issues? This is actually a really important thing, and I'm not sure how widely this is done in organisations, but think of the benefit of looking at data across the business to see trends in maybe increasing sick leave or workplace grievances or low morale. So you're not picking out any one individual, but you're looking for general trends across the organisation. One of the handouts that we've got to hand out to you today will go through some questions specifically around this. And then the third area is questions around the supporting management system. This is the bit that I think is so important. Is your quality management system in place? Does it have operational processes? You know, most quality management systems, if they're well developed, will focus specifically on the quality, on the processes underpinning the business. They don't all do that, unfortunately. So what's really needed here is very clear business as usual, operational, and any other processes, and it should be documented. And in particular, documented in those areas which are really critical. Maybe if there's a weakness in or a heavy dependence, perhaps even on certain personnel, or if there are certain elements of that process which really need to be done a certain way, they're absolutely the areas that need to be very well documented so others can pick it up and work to it as needed. Have your contingent processes been documented? Well, these are the communication and support processes if somebody is suffering a mental ill health episode. Communication is the standout here. When are you going to say something? To whom? What are you going to say? It's a very challenging area to say as much as you need, but not give away more than you need around what that individual is experiencing. So oftentimes it can be helpful to have this planned out, at least generically, in advance. And it can take the emotion and the stress out of preparing your communications as well. And these processes too, just like your risks, they need to be periodically reviewed and updated. hopefully by now you're thinking, perhaps we should have a look at how we're doing these things back in the office. So those three areas are some of the questions that you might ask. The approach you might take could look like this. And I should actually clarify this because there are risks at two levels. The first step is to do a risk assessment of the organisation's approach to psychosocial health. And you will look at those three areas that we've just discussed. And risk is mentioned in both places. What I mean by this is the assessment is an evaluation. The risk assessment of the organisation's approach is an evaluation of what's the compliance, what are the gaps, what are the areas that need to be looked at. When we do this through the iMind, we use a traffic light approach. Because we can't say that a gap is absolutely fundamental and essential to the business. We can just recognise that there is a gap. It's then up to the rest of the business to work out if they're going to address it or not. So at the top level, that risk assessment is really your traffic light evaluation. Do you have it? Should you have it? Or do you not have it? And the areas that you'll look at when you're doing that assessment are risk assessment and understanding, mental health protocols, and the supporting management system. Once you've done that, you'll probably pull it together into a report or something like that, take it to managers to discuss, because they are the ones who will make decisions around, is the risk acceptable or is it not? What's the level of resourcing we're going to apply? What's the training? What are the changes we'll introduce to the business? That is their responsibility and their call. So they'll develop the possible solutions. But it doesn't end there, because then you need to also take that information to the workforce. This impacts them. This is about them. So they need to contribute as well and make their own recommendations and suggestions as to what could be put in place. And finally, having gone through those steps, if you haven't already, put in place a management system that defines the business as usual processes. Or if you already have a quality management system, make sure that this is what it covers, these business as usual processes, to make them very clear. Okay. What are the risks? As I said before, there are many. There are lots of different risks that you can pick up from many different sites. There are also many different, so there's a guide available in the ISO standard 45003. That's got 22 risks. The New South Wales Code of Practice has 16. In South Australia, they identify 12. I've got 14. Look, there is no one perfect list, but all of them will give you some good information on what the risks might be that could apply to your business. And you're not, hopefully, going to have all 12 or 14 or 22 of them. It's also easy to find this list of possible risks on the WorkSafe Tasmania website. So there's no direct link. Well, that's so easy enough to find. If you go to from home, you select the health and safety on the home page, then the codes of practice. And then in that list, you'll find that there's managing psychosocial risks as listed there. So that's pretty easy to find. Out of these lists, which include, as you can see, things like harassment, conflict, low job control, poor support, maybe remote or isolated work. So there's a whole range of different things here. The one that is standing out on the side are personal challenges. And as far as I can see, that's not being captured in any other risk, because it's not so much of a workplace risk. But what we've seen from our case studies is that it can be a significant risk, and it's one that you really can't prepare for. It's a significant risk, and it's alarmingly common as well. So if you can't predict these types of risks, then the best approach is to put in place mental health protocols and support the business with their strong management system and process systems. With the other risks, you can develop action plans. And we're going to have a look at an action plan and see what that might be like. So they're very simple. This is the one on poor support. There are some more examples if you go to the South Australia website, but very simply, it looks at the some of the approaches that should be undertaken. In this case, have the right workplace culture, provide training, do regular reviews, have conversations and communicate, But what you don't do or shouldn't do is use performance tools as a disciplinary measure or allow bullying or discrimination or any of those other negatives. So if you work on the approach and minimize the don't do's, then your support levels that you can provide to people with psychosocial issues in the workplace will increase. Okay, let's move to, we'll go back to those 3 case studies. And I want to ask, would there have been different outcomes if we had done things differently? So we can look at this through the lens of those 3 steps we discussed earlier. What are the risks and the understanding, the mental health protocols, and the management and operational controls. In the first case study, if you remember, Billy's son was going to the Ukraine. Could we have anticipated this risk? No, we wouldn't have known. As a business, we wouldn't have known. Were there mental health protocols that we could have implemented? Well, maybe, but Billy left the business, so we couldn't actually implement them. What about the management system? Are there improvements that we could have made there? Yes, quite possibly there were. There were clear processes even at the time, but there was very little tracking or reporting back on where the project was at. So maybe backup support would have been good, especially for the larger jobs. In reality, what was done? There was backup support. A new supervisory role was created for every big job to monitor progress and also to support the consultant, even if there was no problems happening, but just to provide a second head on that project. This has been implemented and it's found to improve the entire project management approach. So it's worked really well. And the business is now better placed if, God forgive, it should ever happen again. In the second case, Jason, where his son was hospitalized, could we have anticipated this risk? No, wish we could, but no. Mental health protocols? Well, maybe, but there were already pretty good contingency processes in place and the clients were contacted, so there was a lot of good communication going on. Everyone knew what was happening. Could we have improved the management system? Well, there were clear processes that were established, but something went wrong and the gremlins jumped in and messed things up. So perhaps the processes could have been improved by introducing a reminder to review the work very carefully. Now, in most businesses and under most quality management systems, there will always be work progress checks. That you can call them internal audits, you could call them spot checks and things like that. They happen quite often, and so they should. But what could have happened in this situation is that the review was recognized, the issue recognized as high risk and therefore included in the review. It was not in this instance, and that's where there was a whole lot of rectification that was required. But going forward, that business now has that review process set up. So it can identify high risk problem areas and will keep an eye on them to make sure that they get back up to speed. The other thing I wanted to mention was that a care package was sent to Jason, which he really did appreciate because he was having a rough time with all of that. Okay, and then we've got the third case. Belinda went on leave to her grandmother's funeral, leaving others resentful and unhappy. Could we have anticipated this risk? No, although it was possibly emerging, but over a very short time frame. Could the management system have been improved? It wasn't too bad, actually, and so maybe not. But here we're seeing that there could have been some improvements in the mental health protocols. This is where further support and care could have been shown to Belinda. Better internal mental health protocols that recognised her situation may have led to better reactions from her co-workers, because they may better have understood what she was going through. And better communication can go 2 ways, because it might also have helped Belinda recognise the impact on her co-workers, which perhaps she could have acknowledged. And that may have smoothed out the situation much better than the way things were left. Okay, we're coming to the end of the presentation, I want to leave you now with a couple of final reminders. There are about 6 of them that are here. And so we know that there are many psychosocial risks and hazards, but some of them can be monitored and some drop into your lap out of nowhere. The business does have multiple obligations, of course, to the person who's experiencing distress, but also to the rest of the business, to other staff and customers. So these 6 reminders are structured as things that you should keep in mind perhaps in your organisation. So firstly, have that documented policy and procedure. A piece of paper doesn't go very far, but the fact that it's a statement of commitment and it can be shared around the organisation, that's where it becomes very useful. Periodically assess the triggers that might cause psychosocial issues. So these are being aware of the risks and any changes in the business. So for that, it's looking at the codes of compliance, but it's also looking at your own internal data. Is there a message coming through on sick leave, for example? Periodically assess the capacity of the business to respond to psychosocial incidents. Is it easy enough for people to raise their hand and say, I think I've got a problem here? Or might they be fearful that their managers or someone or others in their team might react badly to that and tell them to just get on with life? And what sort of support is available to them once that's been recognised? As I've been saying, develop a management system with clear processes that go through the steps, record keeping for processes around the business. Make sure you have the contingent processes to minimise the impact on other staff and maintain ongoing commitment to customers so that business can maintain its obligations to its other interested parties. And periodically check that everything is working, your management system, your contingent processes. Because I believe you'll be getting a copy of this presentation, here are some useful references. Now, there are links behind these, which I'm not sure will really work when you get a PDF, come to think of it. There may be another way we could make them available to you, but there are some pretty good references out there, and we've collected just a handful from the ISO standard, which is a component of the 45001 standard, to various codes of practice. And there's some reading there from a recent article that Certex wrote. Thank you all for your time. I hope you have found this at least a little bit interesting and helpful. And I'm very happy now to answer any questions if we have them.
So thank you, Diane, for your presentation. And we have also just shared the 2 documents in the handouts window. So please click on the handouts tab to now download those documents. And if anyone does have any questions for our presenter today, Diane Gibert from Business Monitor, please use the chat window.
So I take it there's no questions so far. So we'll wait till a few come
no questions. Yes, no questions. Ooh, no questions coming through it at the moment. But just as a reminder to everyone, as well as the resources, this webinar has been recorded, so please head to WorkSafe Tasmania's YouTube page towards the end of October to revisit this webinar or to watch any other webinars that you may have missed during the month of October. So a question, Diane, do you have any advice for how to handle a manager within an organisation creates a poor mental health environment within the organisation?
Yes, that is a really good question, which means there is no easy answer for something like that. I suppose there are probably 2 parts behind that. One is the behavior of the manager and the culture or the environment that they're creating. The other can often be the clarity of the work for the team. So how well defined is the rest of the teamwork? Is the manager really putting in place obstacles, or are there other obstacles in place that the manager fails to recognize and resolve? I rather subscribe to the view that the role of the manager is there to enable the members of the team. If they're not able to do that for whatever reason, then there is then you've got a problem. How to address that one specifically, I think, if you were to do your own analysis of what is the situation, always it's a good point, a starting point, to raise it with the manager concerned, but with a series of questions that are not in any way blaming. You've got other people in your organization most commonly that you could speak with as well. Usually, if in a larger organization, you'll have someone in HR. So again, keep the blame out of it, but you should be able to speak with others in your organization if you can't talk with your direct manager.
Thanks,
So I hope
Diane.
that one helps. I'm sure it's not uncommon, but it's not an easy one.
Going back to risk assessment, is there a good risk assessment to cover psychosocial risks?
Glad you asked that one. There is indeed. If you go to the WorkSafe Code of Conduct Compliance, there is an excellent risk register at the back of that. I have it open on my screen. You won't be able to see it, but while I pull it up, I'll just quickly tell you the sorts of things that it covers and why I think it's really good. So it's the WorkSafe one that you can get through the Tasmanian Health website. So I spoke before, homepage, health and safety, and then into the codes of compliance. What this risk register does, it's got a whole series of headings, and they go through things like identify the hazard, but then look at things like how frequently are workers exposed to this hazard, how long does this exposure last, how severe is the exposure, are other hazards present this might interact with, how effective are the current controls, and so on. There's another 4 or 5 column headings. They're really good because they're ways that you can evaluate, different ways to evaluate just how serious this risk or hazard is for your business. So I'd recommend you have a look at that one. That's Appendix C, page, I think it's the last page of that document.
Thank you, Diane. Just a general comment that's come through. My organisation has definitely been more focused on preventative controls. It is interesting to consider the impact of psychosocial incidents that can't be predicted or prevented by us as essentially a business continuity risk.
Yes, thank you. Very well said. And that is indeed the message that the thing that I want to talk about here, because businesses also have to be protected, and they've got a whole range of other commitments. So thank you very much for saying that and for saying it so well.
Thanks, Diane. How do cultural differences impact the management of psychosocial hazards in a diverse workforce?
Oh, yes. They can be very challenging. And it's one of the risks, in fact, that's recognized. It is a psychosocial risk where you have different views, different cultural backgrounds. It's just so easy to misunderstand, to make an unintentional error and offend people. The best really is to communicate, to talk about it. And I guess, it's such a good question, and it's a reminder for me as well, where you bring on people as newbies into your organization, speak to them about what works for them and what doesn't, and how you operate as a business yourself. So that even though you might not be able to touch on the issues that could later on cause problems, at least you've opened that discussion. And so you've got something that you can refer back to. Like, yeah, we didn't pick that one up when you first started. We can see it's developed as a problem now, but you know that our intention is to work with you on this. So hopefully that will help.
Okay, and can you recommend any training to undertake in that space?
No, I can't off the top of my head, but I will have a look at it because it's a very good question. There definitely is training that is available, and we've looked at some in other areas. May I come back to you on that question? I'll see if I can gather some useful references for you.
No, that's all good, Diane. We can certainly take that one on notice. And again, in relation to training, is there any type of training that you recommend for workers and management to raise awareness about psychosocial risks?
I'll add that to the list. Yes, there is quite a lot of training that you can do, and it varies. It goes from general awareness. There is mental health first aid that you can do. Some of it, and some of that is really, really good. So there's a variety of training courses that you can do, and I'll see what I can find for you.
Okay, thank you, Diane.
These are good questions. Sorry, I can't answer all of them.
No, that's all good. So we can definitely take those questions on notice, Diane, and we can share your responses with those who attended today's webinar. And make sure that if anyone hasn't downloaded the handouts, please head to the handout tab to download those resources.
Can I say that if anybody comes up with a question afterwards, I would be more than happy for them to contact me. I don't know if it would occur through you, Stephanie, through WorkSafe Tasmania, or you can use my email that's on the screen right here. But more than happy if you have any questions to talk with you personally and directly.
Yes, no, either, Diane. I'm more than happy for people to
Okay.
contact you directly or come to us, depending on how private they would like to make that conversation.
Great, thanks.
Just a general comment, psychosocial risk management is part of the Cert 4 in WHS.
Oh, very good, thank you. Thanks, yes. Actually, it wasn't when I did it, but then I did it a few years ago. So it's good to hear that it's part of it now.
With no further questions coming through, Diane, I'll begin to wrap up today's webinar. So
Okay.
thank you again to our presenter today, Diane Gibert from Business Monitor, for her webinar, Psychosocial Health in the Workplace. We know the risk, do we have the management plan? Today's webinar was part of WorkSafe Tasmania Month. Please head to worksafe.tas.gov.au to see what other webinars and in-person events we have running throughout the month of October. Today's webinar was also recorded. Please head to WorkSafe Tasmania's YouTube page to review and share today's webinar, or to visit other webinars that we are running throughout this month of October. WorkSafe Tasmania Month is also an initiative that is funded by the WorkCover Tasmania Board, and again, we thank today's presenter, and we thank all of our attendees, and we wish you a safe and healthy rest of the day.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. And thank you, WorkSafe Tasmania. And to all of you attending, I also wish you a great day.
Thank you.